Hello and welcome to our special program To The Point. There have been a number of developments in the recent past vis-a-vis Indian Navy, be it the induction of new warships or the tragic accident aboard INS Sindhurakshak, the kilo class submarine on which there was an explosion which led to the loss of lives as well as the loss of very important part of the Indian Navy's fleet, that is INS Sindhurakshak. We have with us today retired Commodore Uday Bhaskar. He is also a former director of IDSA as well as National Maritime Foundation. So welcome to the show. The focus in today's program would be Indian Navy, the doctrines which command the way the Indian Navy should function, the capabilities of our naval forces, as well as how we can go ahead and ensure that those capabilities are transformed into actionable agenda vis-a-vis the requirements of our strategy as well as diplomatic needs. First of all, let me come to the tragic accident, because this is something which has been a recent one. Why do you think this kind of accident could have happened aboard one of the submarines of our Navy, one? And two, what kind of impact this incident might have on the capabilities of our naval forces?
As you have rightly described it, the Sindhurakshak is a very, very tragic accident. I'd just like to qualify this further by saying that it's also an unprecedented accident, and I would even go to the extent of describing it as stand-alone, meaning that if you review the submarine experience of the Indian Navy, we got our first boat, the INS Kalveri, in December of 1967. From then to now, the Indian Navy submarine arm has had what I would call as a very impressive safety record, even when compared with the major navies of the world. But yes, Sindhurakshak has happened, and as an analyst I could only conjecture at this stage, awaiting the results of the Board of Inquiry, that there was some kind of an ordnance related accident. This is something that the Honorable Defence Minister, Mr. Antony, has also confirmed. And clearly, if you have an explosion of this nature, it would point to a lapse, an inadequacy. Now, whether this had happened because of material failure, meaning that is there something about the compartment, the ordnance that led to this explosion? Was it human failure, meaning that is there anything about the procedures that had to be adopted? Or was it some completely unanticipated exigency, what we normally refer to as the freak accident? This would be established by the Board of Inquiry as and when they submit their findings. But prima facie at this stage, as an analyst, I would make the following case, that if you remember the first visual, as the news began to emerge, you saw a huge flame above the platform, and you may recall that there was a certain orange sheen to it. Now generally there is a thumb rule that if there is orange which is discernible in a flame, it is associated with HE, high explosive. So one could make a reasonable assumption that this was ordnance related. It was clearly an explosion that gutted the submarine, also led to this huge fire. Now the sequence of, did the fire lead to the explosion? Did the explosion cause a fire? I think the Board of Investigation would be able to establish, but I accept your point that there was a lapse, there was a certain inadequacy in the safety procedures or whatever else be the way in which that submarine was being prepared for sea, and this would have to be reviewed in the first instance, I would say, about the submarines and their own internal protocols. But I'd like to make a larger point, which is that I think that we also need perhaps to address another issue, which is the material state of the Indian military. I'm saying across the board.
Across the board.
Your program is on the Navy, but I'm taking the liberty of extending this and saying that one chronic inadequacy for the Indian military is the fact that we have not been able to induct new platforms at the appropriate time. Whether you talk about the artillery gun, you talk about the main battle tank, you talk about a fighter aircraft, a ship or a submarine, the lead time to induct a new platform is getting longer. and that in a way erodes national military capability.
We will definitely come to that, Mr. Bhaskar. We'll definitely talk about the way deadlines are being missed as far as induction of new platforms or induction of, in case of Navy, new submarines, indigenously built as well. The programs are running way behind time. But coming back to INS Sindhurakshak, the question is, what is the extent of effect on our Navy's capabilities will this tragic incident have, given the fact that the Indian Navy is far from even having the match strength of the required number of submarines which it should have?
Again, I think that's an accurate observation that the current force level of the Indian submarine arm is actually shrinking. We have 14 boats, what we used to call as the 10, which were ex-Soviet/Russia, the Kilo class, and 4 which had come to us from West Germany. Now today, with the loss of the Sindhurakshak, I personally think this submarine is not coming back. There was also another submarine that was alongside which had been towed away, but we gather that also had some kind of damage, which really means that immediately, as I see it, the tactical impact is that your available frontline boats are going to go down by a reasonable percentage, which means that it would increase the tasking of other units. So this is something that the Navy would have to address at a tactical level. But again, I think the accident of the Sindhurakshak points to the larger issue, which is why have force levels in the Indian Navy submarine arm been allowed to shrink? This is a country, I repeat, that has been operating submarines since December 1967. We know the relevance of the submarine in the Indian security calculus. Today, the submarine has become an exceedingly critical platform, a platform of choice for Indian Ocean states, including Pakistan, China. We know the kind of challenges that this would pose to us. So, to me as an analyst, the question I keep asking is, who is accountable?
Who is
Why
accountable?
did these delays take place?
Well, definitely we'll talk about this, and as I mentioned in the beginning, I'll definitely want to ask you the concept of naval doctrines, those doctrines which go ahead and dictate, or rather give a viewpoint as to how the Indian Navy will function. But we'll do that in the second part of the program. Before that, let's take a short break out here.
We have a lot of, I would say, gaps in terms of what you might call as the vision.
Welcome back. We still have retired Commodore Uday Bhaskar with us. Sir, coming to the India's strategic vision vis-a-vis its naval force is concerned, the doctrines which are handed out on a periodic basis. In 2004 we had a naval doctrine which sort of revised the defensive outlook of the Indian Navy, if I'm not wrong, to a more aggressive one. How would you go ahead and look at this particular change in the outlook, strategic outlook, the way Indian Navy should function in 2004? There were changes later in 2009 as well. We'll talk about it later. But what about this particular important change? Because since till 2004, it was more or less a defensive sort of stuff. In 2004, the doctrine said that let's be a little more aggressive.
I think immediately I'd like to qualify by this by saying that if we talk about the Indian Navy's documents, the Doctrine 1, yes, you're right in observing that it has now got a different kind of orientation, but as opposed to aggressive, I would say that it is forward looking, and that's the only minor caveat I'd make. Okay. But if I could just back up a bit, I think, what you're drawing attention to is a very important area, that for the Indian Navy, today there is what you might call as a well articulated doctrinal underpinning. There is a sense that the institution of the Indian Navy over the years has evolved. It now has a sense about its own strategic approach, and all of this is also reflected in what we call as a vision document. So I can say this with some, I would say, satisfaction, that the Indian Navy, and I'm making no reference or comparison to the other services, by its very nature, the nature of navies, has been able to articulate what you might call as a doctrinal underpinning about the service, the institution, the silent service, and also its correlation with the larger national grid, meaning that the Navy is one component of India's military. It's one of the tools that the Indian state has in its quiver. But the strategy, the doctrine, the underpinning, whatever the Indian Navy is able to envision professionally, saying that we can bring to the table the following capacities, the following capabilities, but they have to be part of a larger grand national strategy.
That's what I'm saying. Some say that this was meant to ensure that the triad, the nuclear triad, is complete post 90s era, when India had tested its nuclear capability, and then it was decided that we should have a nuclear triad, but then the Navy should be ready for that nuclear triad. And this particular doctrine which I was talking about laid a strong emphasis on MND, that's minimum nuclear deterrent. So do you agree that this was one of the reasons?
No, if I could again just sort of put this in context, India has what you might call as a national nuclear doctrine, which we had unveiled after the nuclear tests of May 1998. Mr. Vajpayee was then our Prime Minister. For a long time, this remained the equivalent of an unofficial doctrine which the National Security Advisory Board had drafted. But the central feature there is that India is committed to no first use. This is the National Nuclear Doctrine. Subsequently, it was adopted, and within that doctrinal position, it is now received wisdom that when a country has a nuclear weapon, deterrence can be achieved at three levels. You can have a land-based missile which can provide deterrence with the nuclear warhead, or you can have it as an air-launched missile which the Soviets and the Americans had in the Cold War, or you have what is called as the deterrent at sea. That is placed in a nuclear submarine. It's called an SSBN. So for India, the nuclear triad that is being referred to in the doctrine is a national vision. The submarine has a very important role to play. What the Indian Navy has done is to take on board the national vision, and it is in that context that we must look at the Arihant, whose reactor went critical about a month ago, which is a very significant achievement. So I just want to clarify that India has a nuclear doctrine. The Navy has put out what you might call its own institutional service doctrine and the underpinning and a strategy and a vision document. And the challenge, as I see it for the nation, is the harmonization between the national grand strategy and what individual services can bring to it, meaning Navy, Army, Air Force, and the nuclear capability of the Indian state.
Now, despite the fact that there has been an attempt to have an aspirational doctrine for Indian Navy in place, and the facts which you pointed out right now, there is a lot needs to be done between what is being aspired and what has to be done. Deadlines are being missed as far as acquiring new be it aircraft carriers for Indian Navy, new submarines, or even say refitting the older ones, because one of the submarines, if I am not wrong, have been lying in one of the shipyards for almost 10 years now, and I guess Indian Navy seems to have already written it off.
No, you're right again. We have a lot of, I would say, gaps in terms of what you might call as the vision, both of the Navy as a service, forget about vision, even a plan, and what you have realized. It may be of interest to note that the Indian Navy's first plan document goes back to 1948, 1 year after independence. At that time, the Navy was envisioned as being a balanced Navy that would have a surface component, naval aviation, a carrier, 2 carriers, 1 for each fleet, and subsurface or submarines. It took the country 14 years to get the first aircraft carrier, which was the INS Vikrant, the first Vikrant that came in 61. Then it took us another 25 years to get the second aircraft carrier, which was the INS Virat. And the Vikrant got decommissioned. The Virat is now on its last legs, and we are hoping that the indigenously built carrier, the second Vikrant, will be commissioned over the next year or two. So you can see that the lead time or the cycle is getting longer. Now this has to do with resources. I am the first to accept India's national security. The principal driver is India's economy, meaning that if you have a healthy economy, robust GDP growth rates, then as a percentage of GDP, we are able to allocate money to the defense sector. Now what has happened progressively, particularly after 1962, the war with China, we, I think, have had what you might call as an obsession with the land border. I mean, I withdraw the word obsession. Countries have to take national security very carefully. We had an experience that scarred us. So from 1962 onwards, for the next 20 years, even after the war for Bangladesh, the entire focus was on land and then air, Army, Air Force. It's only in the Rajiv Gandhi years, 10 roughly I would say, you see the emphasis on the Indian Navy, meaning that funds are being provided again. But within these very modest resources, a lot of people refer to the Indian Navy as the Cinderella service, meaning that we are the smallest service, we get the least resources, but yet, let me say with a lot of pride, that the professional texture of the Indian Navy is something that is acknowledged the world over. And India's future, to me, India's potential lies in its maritime geography.
Let's have a short break out here.
Every major power is looking at the Indian Ocean and they will be here.
Welcome back. Let's come to Indian Ocean region, and very commonly referred to as IOR in defense parlance, specifically Navy parlance. Now, IOR is really important as far as Indian Navy and India's strategic needs and even economic needs are concerned, because if you look at the kind of events which have occurred, most of the armed conflicts post World War II have happened in the Indian Ocean region, be it the Iran-Iraq war, the Gulf War, the Afghan, the battle in Afghan which went on, and several other conflicts. That underlines the importance of India having a naval force which can not only protect the country's interests, but also project India as a power, as a regional power which has a say in the entire region vis-a-vis the economic efforts as well as strategic efforts. So, what's your take on this? Is this the new change in the doctrines which we're talking about, more or less aimed at from going from defensive to the aspirational, was because India wanted to go ahead and have a sort of influence over the IOR, that's Indian Ocean region?
I think the first point is that when we talk about the IOR, the Indian Ocean, I would say that it has an abiding relevance for India, not just the Indian Navy. I go to the extent of suggesting that India's future is inexorably linked with the Indian Ocean. Meaning that if you look at India over the last 5 or 6 decades, the big changes that took place in this country are often associated with colors. We say we had the Green Revolution, the agricultural revolution, which was driven by a certain political determination, and we acquired the right technologies. Then we had the White Revolution, the Milk Revolution, which brought India right to the front ranks of the milk suppliers of the world. I make the case that what India now needs to do is to think about the Blue Revolution, meaning that we have neglected our seas and oceans for the last 60-70 years, ever since we became independent, for a variety of reasons, including the war with China. Today, if you look at India over the next 2 or 3 decades, from 2014 say till about 2040, I would say that every aspect of relevance for India, whether it is on the economic and trade front, hydrocarbons, energy, security, or India's overall political and diplomatic profile, are all linked to the ocean. And just as we are looking at the ocean from our perspective, all the major powers of the world are also looking at the Indian Ocean in a strategic manner, which is why you have, I'd like to list the United States, which actually never left the Indian Ocean because of Diego Garcia. When the British left, the United States became the equivalent of the dominant power. The Chinese plan to come into the Indian Ocean, which is why their ships are here on an anti-piracy patrol. They have these robust political and economic
the numbers
relations.
have been increasing in the Gulf of
Absolutely.
Aden for quite some time now.
And all over, by the way, apart from the Middle East, the Persian Gulf, you now have Chinese presence along the Indian Ocean littoral, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and the islands. Again, it's a legitimate presence of the Chinese because of their economic and trade compulsions, but it does have a strategic and security relevance for India. So my short point is that every major power is looking at the Indian Ocean and they will be here. If India wants to also be seen as being able to manage its own interests, I'm not even using the word defend, manage its own interests in the Indian Ocean, which are broad spectrum. And we are not talking just about Mumbai, November 2008, the terror attack that had a linkage with the sea. But to say that across the spectrum, from low intensity conflict, terrorism, conventional warfare to nuclear weapons, missiles, the strategic dimension, the Indian Ocean, because of its geography, and oceanic spaces are also linked to cyber and space. So there is a whole connectivity. India needs to acquire the appropriate levels of competence and at the end of the day have the strategic vision, meaning that the onus lies on New Delhi. It lies on Raisina Hill. Since I am on Rajya Sabha TV, let me take the liberty of saying with our legislature. Our legislators should be seized, they should be aware of the opportunities and the challenges in the maritime realm. And unless that happens, I don't think we would be able to formulate what I would call as a holistic approach, which, let me add in parenthesis, China is moving on that path. Because like India, till recently China had anything between 17 to 19 different departments looking after matters oceanic and maritime. And they realized that this was not the way to go about it. In a very significant, what I would call as institutional rewiring, they have brought their maritime and naval responsibilities under a more manageable kind of institutional framework. India needs the same thing. But that can only happen if there is an awareness that India's future, India's security, and I would even say the socio-economic indicators of our people are linked with the Indian Ocean. There is a sort of lighter vein quip saying that the Indian Ocean is the only place, the only ocean in the world where fish die of old age because we do not have the technology to harvest the oceans, which is why others come into your area, and then you have other problems. The traditional fishermen, their livelihood is being removed, all kinds of other problems. But if you can maintain your presence, bring the right level of technology, and I keep repeating this point, maritime or India's naval sort of, the India's maritime future is not just navy, it's about ports. I mean, it's a matter of shame. India does not have one single port that can deal with the kind of container traffic that the rest of the world does. So therefore, we have the ignominy that big ships don't touch India. They stop in Sri Lanka or somewhere close by, and smaller ships bring cargo into India. This is a country that wants to be counted amongst the big players dependent on export import. So our maritime capacity is not just navy, it's the whole infrastructure, managing your ports, your shipbuilding, small ports, and we have just completely not utilized our coastal geography. India could have actually reduced the load both on its railroad and on the motor transport by investing and using coastal transport. But we have not done that.
all this, if I may sum up, apart from the fact that you rightly pointed out that it's not only about Navy, it's about other maritime functions as well. But if you talk about Navy specifically, then it seems by ensuring that the influence in Indian Ocean region increases with each passing day, it seems Indian Navy is trying to go ahead and acquire that true blue water navy status, if I am not wrong.
No, Indian Navy is a blue water navy, and despite all the constraints that I have mentioned, let me say that the Indian Navy has actually done the flag proud. And if the presence of India is now acknowledged and accepted in the IOR, it's because of the Indian Navy. The tsunami of 2004, the Lebanon crisis, the evacuation, whenever there has been a need, the Indian Navy has been there, the anti-piracy effort. But all I am saying is that we could do a lot more.
A lot more can be done. A lot more can be done. Definitely a lot more can be done. Thank you so much, Commodore Uday Bhaskar. So this was retired Commodore Uday Bhaskar talking to us about how the Indian Navy has moved from one position to another one. What are the challenges before India's naval forces and what can be expected? We'll come back next week with a different personality on a different topic. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha Television.